Hello and welcome to Contra Mundum. I'm your host, Pastor Andrew Isker, and with me is my co-host, CJ Engel, joining us from a remote location. It's secret. I think he's actually in, on scene in Ukraine at the moment, so that's why he's not able to get video here. He's just here with audio, so you don't get to see CJ. And I won't be able to see his face when he lies to me about sending me the Greco gum. But also we have our guest with us today, Jon Harris, from Conversations That Matter, a very popular, successful YouTube channel and podcast. So we're very happy to have Jon join us. Welcome, Jon. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, CJ. Engel, of course, is a very Ukrainian name, I hear. So
yes.
The Engels go way back into, the Donbass or something.
Yeah, you have your family has a coal mine there, right? Is that correct, CJ?
I'm German, man.
You don't even play along.
Engels.
He does it. Yeah.
That is a German thing, though, not to play along like that, to just give me the facts. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Very efficient. Very efficient, CJ. That's right. Wonderful. Well, the first thing to start off with our conversation today, we're recording on Thursday, and just yesterday, Wednesday, we had another of seemingly endless indictments of former President Trump, and this one is, the most absurd and ridiculous yet. He was indicted over, 4 counts regarding January 6th, and so they want to, make it like he incited a deadly insurrection, and it was the indictment counts are strange. I don't know if you guys have read them at all. But one of them is, interfering with an official government proceeding, which that is extremely vague. What does that mean? Interfere? He gave a speech, right? That's literally all he did. He gave a speech and then tweeted telling people to go home, right? Don't do violence. Don't do anything bad. And so nevertheless, they're indicting him over it. And they're also using the same statute. They charged him on the same statute that they successfully prosecuted Ricky Vaughn over. It is this like obscure federal law that was written to rein in the Ku Klux Klan in like the 1860s or 1870s. And so of course they're going to try him in Washington, D.C., and the judge that is presiding over him has handed down all of these sentences that are even more go beyond what the prosecutors asked for in terms of sentencing. So it does not look good for the president. But tell me what you guys think about that. What are your initial opinions off the bat about the indictment, what it means, and what it means for the country going forward, especially as we get closer to the election?
Well, it's funny. I saw we were talking about what's her name, Nancy Mace, last time, and people were saying, it's crazy that people will go out and vote and support for Donald Trump when he lives this immoral lifestyle. But she says when, she lets slip this one, thing at the prayer breakfast, and everyone's all over her. It's just hypocrisy. They don't realize that what's going on here is the reaction to the regime's war on their enemies is sort of who we rally around. And Trump is a proxy figure for the American people. I don't think in any ideal world people would choose, Christians or conservative, right wingers would choose Donald Trump as sort of their ideal. But for good or for bad, he is the person that represents all of their angst and all their frustrations and all the things that have been scorned on them over the last 50 years. He represents that. And so, of course, the regime's going to attack him. Of course, the regime's going to seek to undermine and trip him up at every chance they get. And that's exactly what's going on. So I have the same opinion as I did last time. This is what they do to him because this is how they react to the spirit of the heritage legacy Americans.
Yeah. What do you think, Jon?
I don't know if I even have words. It's just surreal and it's crazy. And the unequal weights and measures have been going on for so long, but it's at a breaking point now. where you wonder whether you can even take any government proceeding with any modicum of seriousness at this
Yeah.
point on the national level, because they're clearly motivated not by truth or really anything other than trying to maintain and expand their political power. So I I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a depressing thought. I think that's
Mhm.
probably part of the reason that I haven't read a lot about it, just because I'm like, I
Mhm.
saw the headline and I was like,
Ugh.
yeah, like it's pretty
Mhm.
terrible. Um,
Yeah.
I don't really know. Like as an individual person, it's hard to know what do you do about that. Like, do you show up in
Mhm.
DC and start storm the Capitol again or something? But
No.
um, no, probably not a good idea to do that, right? So it's I think for the average ordinary Americans, like the only thing they can do, as CJ rightly said, is support Trump through this. And I think that is part even motivating me to want to support Trump. And I don't even like a lot of the things that, as CJ just said, some of his moral behavior. But it's like if they're going to do this to him, then like they can't get away with it. And I think that's the sense that a lot of people have. We can't let them get away with it. And electing Trump would be a way to like not let them get away with that. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean that's the thing. I mean, I think thinking about it in terms of like the 2024 presidential campaign, which has kind of been, it's extremely boring because DeSantis was supposed to be this, potential, rival that might unseat him, and his campaign has been just a joke. It's been really poorly run, poorly managed. It's fallen flat, in so many different ways. I mean, it's interesting. I was commenting on this a little bit today online, and DeSantis is polling at like between 10 and 15% right now. He's behind Vivek Ramaswamy, and uh, and it's interesting why, because you have this base of support that Trump has within the Republican Party, which is anywhere from 25 to 35% of GOP voters are just he's the guy until he's not running anymore. He's their guy, no matter what. And so like DeSantis's campaign strategy has been so pathetic because he's done everything that all of the more obvious regime aligned candidates like Mike Pence or the goofball from Arkansas, what's his name? I can't even remember.
oh,
He's so
is it
unimportant.
Art something?
Oh, Asa Hutchinson. Asa Hutchinson.
Asa, there you go.
Yeah.
Just say
And
right.
so you have that's a something. It doesn't matter. But guys like
We'll
this,
never hear from him again. So
yeah, they attack him and they go after him like he's this horrible, terrible guy. And DeSantis's campaign has been basically to do the same thing, to attack Trump, to attack his failures and things that frankly I agree with a lot of them. Right, that here's how Trump messed up this thing and that thing, the other thing. But what happens is the Trump voter sees attacks on him in the same way that CJ is talking about, that it's a proxy, just within the paradigm of the Republican race, right? It's a proxy for an attack on them, right? They see them attacking Trump, they see DeSantis attacking Trump, and it's no, they're not attacking him, they're attacking me, and so that's why you see like Vivek, who has never attacked Trump, and a lot of people think he's just a proxy candidate, like running on the same side as Trump, which makes a lot of sense. Um, and he never attacks him. He just keeps climbing the polls. He's always attacking, the issues, the regime, even a little bit. He's attacking the problems that are just so rampant and obvious. And it's like he is running the campaign that DeSantis should have been running. And it becomes obvious, like just even DeSantis's response or really non-response to the indictment, where he's like, "Oh, we need to end the weaponization of the government and Justice Department and so forth." And it's like, yeah, man. And how are you going to do that? You have to do it by like right now showing this is all a sham. It's all fake. And if I become president, I'm going to immediately pardon on every single count uh, Donald Trump day one. First thing I do. And then jail everyone in the Justice Department. Like that needs to be his campaign. And he would climb in the polls doing that, but he's not doing it. He's not
yeah,
saying those things. He's not saying any of that, which tells you like, okay, why did he run in the first place? Who prompted him to run and make him run for president when it didn't seem like a good idea? And it's like, well, it's the donors, it's the people in the Republican Party that wanted an alternative to Trump, that wanted to get rid of Trump. And so the GOP voters, they're not stupid, right? They have really good instincts, I think, actually. And they see this. They see that here's this guy who's running as this alternative to Trump, that somebody wants to get rid of Trump and put him and make him the guy. And it just becomes really obvious, right? The what we're up against is, it's not about this man Trump, or that people have it sounds like are those tanks rolling in around you, CJ? Tanks in Ukraine. I heard some tires squealing, maybe some APCs surrounding you. Make sure you're safe. Are you safe? Yeah, you see these things happen. That it's not, I mean, so many people are like, oh, it's a cult. You guys just love Trump and think he could do no wrong and things like that. And it's like, that's such a low IQ take. It's like, I've always said, like, he's not my ideal guy by any stretch of the imagination. Like, he's not the guy I think, oh man, I love him so much. He's so great. Even though, he's very funny and I appreciate the humor. It is that this is a proxy war against Americans, right? That's what it is. And he stands in for us, and them jailing him is like jailing the 80 million or 75 million people that voted for him, right? They can't throw us all in prison, at least not yet. So the next best thing is taking him down, right? That's what this looks like. That's what it looks like to everyone. And so, I mean, part of me, just like for entertainment's sake, maybe, and you just kind of want to like chaos max a little bit, is, boy, it would be fun to see him win the election in a jail cell. That would be that's where America is at right now in
so awesome.
Current year. I mean, it's like, I mean, I don't, forgive me for making the reference to Nelson Mandela, but it'd be like Mandela being free from prison and becoming something like that.
Yeah. Before, I mean, like,
yeah,
it's criminal to oppose the regime, and so any legitimate right-wing figure that's serious in the future is going to have been indicted. He's going to be a criminal. He's going to have been put in jail, or been confronted by the State Department. That's sort of what we should expect. And Trump's the cutting edge of that type of figure. So yeah, super based. I'm down.
Yeah, no, I love it. I hope. I mean, if they are actually, I think they're supposed to arraign him and maybe take a mugshot. Like, if they haven't taken any mugshots yet, and so I'm like, let's go. Give me that mugshot. I'll wear that T-shirt.
Can you imagine him replacing Benjamin Franklin on the $100 bill with his mugshot?
Yes, when we win, that is what we will do.
All right, let's get John to weigh in now.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't really have much to say. I guess, I mean, the only takeaway with the race is that in order to win on the Republican primary, you would have to be more hated by the media than Trump, and that's not a position that any of them seem to want to try to compete for. They really want to. They're like satisfied to let Trump be hated by the media, and they'll kind of like not say or not do things that are considered as extreme or radical. But they think that they can still somehow appeal to the Republican primary voters by giving better reasons, or edging Trump out in some area where he wasn't quite as polished or he wasn't quite as good, and they were, or they can be. And that's just like not knowing what time it is. And I would say that applies to probably every single person who's running for the Republican nomination, including Vivek. He's young and fresh. That's what everyone says about him. And I get that, but he's certainly not competing for the position of let me try to get more hated than Trump. Like, he wants to, he wants this fresh, positive vision. And I just don't know that where in the 1980s Reagan Republican Party era, I mean, that's where the Republican Party is stuck in some ways. They think that that's the vision that's going to get them elected. And in 2023, when we're pretty much at war, even though it's somewhat of a cold war, it's gotten hot in places, but it is a war. It's not the 1980s anymore. And I think that whoever's going to get the Republican nomination is going to have to be someone who is very brave, who is very willing to risk it all and suffer deprivation to prove their legitimacy there, and to prove that they actually have the interests of the people at heart and not just their own. And people see that and recognize it, and it's the only metric they have for measuring whether a candidate is actually going to do a good job or not, because they've heard a lot of talk for years and it doesn't amount to anything. But once there's actions put behind it and you're willing to risk your neck and you have skin in the game, I think people respond better to that. And that's what the other candidates are failing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, speaking of Trump, speaking of Trump, I think, it's interesting. We talk about, especially stuff that Jon, talks about and has really good commentary all the time about is big evangelicalism, and in particular, right within the context of current politics and the current conflicts ongoing. It's you see these big Eva leaders who, to a man, they all elbow each other out to see who can condemn Trump and Trump voters, in the most strident terms. And probably the leader of the pack is Russell Moore. We've talked about Russell Moore several times, and we'll keep talking about him because he's one of the big leaders of this. But he just came out with a new book, and Jon is working on a review of it, of this book of Russell Moore's journey. His journey throughout evangelicalism and all of this kind of stuff. So tell us about Russell Moore's book, so we don't have to buy it, Jon. What do you think about it?
Russell Moore is basically writing a book to, I think, justify himself and the people who think like him that operate or have operated in evangelical organizations. So it's obvious that, especially after 2020, there's been a big split in evangelicalism, and a lot of the popular pastors and leaders who aren't pastors have lost big swaths of their audiences because their audiences don't trust them anymore. Now, this isn't really unique to evangelicalism. This is also happening in the medical establishment and in journalism and in academia and all these places. But I think Moore, he's kind of insulated in this evangelical world, and he approaches it like with the idea that he's never really changed, that he's always had pretty much the same principles, although he kind of waffles on that at certain points in the book. But there are at least two places where he says, hey, I didn't change, we didn't change, but people were radicalized. People were, they followed Trump. They decided to get online during the COVID-19 issue, and they were disconnected from their communities at church. So they became radicalized by online conspiracy theories. And so this is
that
what
all turned out to be
division.
True, by the way. Yeah.
Well, a lot of it did. Yeah. And so he ends up saying that, like, that's the reason that there's so much division. It's not, it's kind of like the reverse of the standard breakup line. It's not me, it's you. I mean, that's really what he's saying. It's not me, it's you. And
It's you.
I think the title of his book is, I mean, you don't even have to buy the book. You really do know this book by its cover. He's saying that evangelicals need to have a come to Jesus moment. There needs to be an altar call for evangelical America. So it insinuates that we don't really have the gospel. We've sacrificed it for a false political gospel that supports Trump and excuses bad behavior and embraces conspiracies. And I mean, it's kind of a funny book in a way because it's so outlandish. There's so many hypocritical things Russell Moore says, like things that he accuses other people of that he himself is doing. There's so many inaccuracies that he puts out there as if it's just an established fact. Like one of the, like he says, like during January 6th, people threw down their American flags and picked up, or they threw away their American flags and replaced them with Confederate flags and what was the other, and Trump flags. And I'm thinking, like, I was there, and there was more American flags there than at any leftist protest, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, I don't know. I don't where is he getting the information? I wonder sometimes, but he's probably just reading the New York Times and believing whatever they said about it. And it's just like, it's that kind of stuff. It can really gaslight you because so much of it is like, he accuses you of being crazy, and yet he says crazy things. And you're like, wait a minute. So I think it's just a big self-justification book for him. And it just really, I think, stands to demonstrate his own self-awareness. there's really nothing. There's no content in it. There's like nothing new, nothing interesting really. It's like something he had to do in order to just keep his name out there and make sure he could do the rounds again on left-wing podcasts and stuff. That's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's this. CJ and I, was it last week, 2 weeks ago? There was a Russell Moore article in like the Atlantic, and and there was like nothing there. We thought about like reading it on the show, and it's like, this is gonna bore everybody. It's just all of this flowery evangelical,
Vague, general
Jesus talk. It's like Jesus jukes everywhere, and it doesn't say anything concrete. And that's the rhetorical style that these guys have always used, which is they know how to wrap things in this very holy, churchy language, and it allows them to deliver regime approved talking points and perspectives to Christians. That's the whole function of all of this. And I mean, on one hand, I think he's right. I think his analysis is somewhat correct. He has always been this way, right? He has always been this, center left figure within evangelicalism, and the people, the average layman, has moved to the right, has become more self-consciously right wing, because people. I mean, you look back to like 2015, nobody was talking about globalism as a thing, as an idea, as a thing that we were, within, a way of viewing the world, a system. No one even talked about that, and now people are fully aware of it. That they don't want us to have nations or borders. They want us to just be generic human beings across the planet that are interchangeable with all the rest of the 8 billion people in the world. And that's Russell Moore's vision of Christianity, is supporting that type of world. And so now people are reacting to that and seeing that this is not good, that these people hate us. They want us to just be cogs in their economic machine, and they want to have a country again. Right. That's what he's reacting to, that no one's listening to them anymore. I mean, you see this like, the Gospel Coalition does not, I mean, despite having, what was it, like 75,000 followers or subscribers on YouTube, and they barely do better than our podcast on most of their videos. It's wild, man. Like nobody listens to anything these guys have to say, and it's telling. Like you see it on Twitter too. Like the only time anyone even talks about TGC is when they say something utterly preposterous and they get ratioed to the moon. That's the only interaction they get online. It's interesting, but at the same time, all of the pastors throughout the country, not all of them, but the overwhelming majority of them, this is like the feeder system that they get their worldview, they get their just their talking points, everything, from these guys, from Russell Moore at Christianity Today, from what David French says. And so there still is a tremendous amount of influence from the top down in that way, but it's not direct to the people anymore. It used to be, but it's not. I mean, what do you think about that in terms of like the sea change that has happened since 2015, 2016, and throughout 2020? And what does it mean? What does it mean going forward, especially in these denominational battles? I mean, we talked about it a little bit with like Aaron Wrenn talking about the split between fundamentalists and whatever, Big Eva or whatever you want to call them. But what does it mean, for the next 10 years? Where are things going to go?
Well, I don't know if the dust has completely settled yet, so I'm not sure exactly where everything's going to land. But I think you see right now there's rising. I don't want to say stars because it's in Christianity, but it's there's definitely rising figures who, like Joel Webbin, we were just talking about off air, how he's got a successful YouTube channel, and part of it's because he's a pastor. He speaks with authority. He speaks plainly. He doesn't do the word salad thing. I think there's been two stages so far. The first stage was 2020, and people woke up to what was really happening with their leaders, whether that was their local pastor or just the evangelical industry as a whole, and where they consumed information from the figures that they had trusted. And a lot of that trust was broken. at least for politically conservative evangelicals. So that was phase one. I think phase two is we're in the middle of right now, and it's a lot softer, but it's it is going to be determinative, because what's happening now is the people who kind of woke up to the fact that so many of their leaders were corrupt are now seeing those same tendencies in some of the people that they thought were against those leaders. So in other words, people who leaders who in 2020, like an Owen Strand, for example, like some of the G3 guys, like, I don't know, I could probably go on, but there are figures who weren't like hard woke, but they maybe their critiques didn't go all the way, or at least they weren't
punches.
Exactly. And and so you've actually brought up the example of like Russell Moore's word salads, but if you read some of these guys, I'm not saying all of them, but some of you're going to see the same thing. It's the same kind of way of talking. It's the same, and I think that there's a distaste that especially young conservative men now have for that, and they can smell it when it's around them. They know what it is. They don't even have to know exactly what you believe, or they can hear the talk. They know that that's like that weak TGC type talk, and they don't care if you're against wokeness or whatever. You're not someone they're interested in. They want plain answers. They want straight talk. They want people who have skin in the game and have somewhat of a masculinity about them. And so I think that's why figures like Doug Wilson, to some extent, is and even Doug Wilson this week is interesting, because even Doug Wilson is now on the ropes a little bit for two things that he said that were one of them in particular was a culture war thing. It wasn't even something he said. It was just a book Canon Press was putting out there that had some problems. But that wouldn't have happened even like 5 years ago. I mean, Canon Press would have been seen as like they're on that far right extreme in evangelicalism. And now, like, they've kind of like, I think with this opening, they've kind of whether they realize they're doing it or not, at least their position is more moderating now and appealing to a broader group of people. And then you have guys that are even more farther right than even Canon now starting to get traction. And so I don't think there's any way to bring these two groups of people together. There's like it's like you're on a tectonic plate, and I mean you're right over the crack, and they're moving away from each other. And there's some people that are stretched out really, a lot right now, but they're not going to be able to maintain that. They're going to have to jump to one side or the other. So I think it's going to be, at the end of the day, it's like, do you want the Russell Moore side, or do you want the more, I guess I'll say Joel Webbins type of side. Not that he's even a major figure yet, but I think he will be potentially. And
I think so,
and
too.
the people in between, I just don't think that they're in 10 years from now, we're probably not even going to be talking about them. That's just my guess, unless they take a side.
Yeah. What do you think, CJ? Are you still there? Are you okay? Are shells coming down around you?
Yeah, I'm good. I was on mute, but I'm good.
Okay.
I concur with John. Go ahead.
Was that it? Okay.
All right. Well, full agreement. Great. Okay. Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think that there is these fault lines that are really obvious to a lot of people, and I see it too. Like Joel, we talked about it before we went on air here, but Joel's he's the one getting attacked like crazy the last couple of weeks. He's attacked over his book, and then you have all these other guys attacking him, and it's funny because like they'll just say like the most vicious stuff. They'll accuse him of being a heretic and things like that.
Yeah.
And then when he defends himself, right, and he did it kind of in a funny way, like that the goofball in Alaska, Nathaniel Jolly, who deleted his account. He made fun of him. He's like, you could get a discount on the conference or whatever by using this promo code. It's like it's
which is a common practice.
I know it's a joke, man. Like, learn to take a joke.
He's not the first one to come up with that, and some people were like making it out like he was or something.
Yeah. What? I can't believe he did that. And it's like, come on. That's unbecoming of a pastor. Unbecoming. And like, I mean, these people take this so seriously. And like, if you defend yourself against them, or if you just even joke around about how stupid all this stuff is, it can be. And again, speaking in this very plain language, this is stupid. This is dumb. Why are these people attacking this way? This makes no sense. You don't have an argument. people are attracted to that, right? Very attracted to someone who just comes out and says what they mean, rather than saying, "Oh, brother, oh, my brother, that's not holy to speak that way. We need to have the fruits of the spirit and blah
Giving me
blah blah." And it's like, come
PTSD.
on, yeah, come on, man. Like, it's so obnoxious. Like, especially like Christian discourse on Twitter and online is you have these guys talking that way, and it's like, just say what you think. Just flat out say it. You don't have to
Or you
dress it up
just
in this language,
or
you
you post
know.
Bible verses, right? That like, the
Yeah,
subtweets of Bible verses that
yeah,
somehow seem to relate to whatever you were talking
yeah,
about, and they paint your enemy as the devil or something, but you're not going to
yeah,
come out and say that directly because that would break a taboo.
yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
that's like,
just
I mean,
say it then.
that's like Moore's book, right? Russell Moore's book has this paragraph in it. I saw
Yes.
it making the rounds where he's clearly talking about James Wood, who is like within the online circles and everything, like the nicest guy, the most mild mannered guy. He's not like me, where I just fire fire away whenever. James Wood, he's a scholar, he's a professor, he's an academic, very restrained, very careful, and all of that, and more just like attacks him. Of course, he doesn't name him because he's a coward. But on the issue of winsomeness, right? Because James has talked about this and has really kind of picked a side, like you said. Like James has taken the side where the winsomeness thing is a total crock. It's fake, and it's used to cover really just being left wing, or espousing Christianized left wing positions. And Moore attacks him over this, and you see this all the time. Like they do that. They attack people, and they use this kind of language to show how
Yeah.
holy they are and what good people they are. And they're just snakes, man. Like um they are manipulative. Like that's what they do, and it's very effeminate actually to operate in this way. And I think that's why, that's why people are attracted to Doug. That's why they're attracted to Joel. That's why they're attracted to all of our guys, is because you just, like Robles, our friend. I always pronounce his name right because I don't I only speak English. But but they're attracted to guys that just say what they think, and are honest. Right, this is what I think about this thing. And so I think you're right. That will continue. That will continue to grow. I But at the same time, the thing that makes me a little bit concerned about the future is, institutions really matter, right? Institutions are very important. Seminaries matter. Denominations matter. I mean, they're mattering less and less as time goes on, but they still really do. Like the PCA, the Southern Baptist Convention, all of these institutions are very important. And it seems like, and I want to get your read on things, but I mean, it seems like we're just not going to be able to make much headway in these denominations because they're just so entrenched in it being on that other tectonic plate. And so how do you see things going? I mean, like you said, the dust hasn't settled. These battles are still ongoing, but where will things be at in 2033, with the denominations?
I think right now it is like what we were talking about initially with like Pence attacking Trump, right? So
Mhm.
these kind of moderating figures, supposedly, who don't see the divide as something that can't be can't be like brought together somehow.
Mhm.
Um, they will they'll go about the business of attacking people though who are on the right, who are hated by every institution pretty much. They'll be on the institutional side even if they themselves claim to be in the abstract against wokeness or whatever. So that I think that's really what our denominations and seminaries are primarily made of, are people like that. And maybe the word that you could use is managers. They are
Mhm.
not really
Mhm.
leaders, they're managers. And they've been taught a particular style of managing that seeks to elevate the success of the institution is based upon whether or not they have smooth sailing at the institution, and if it's stormy, if there's controversy, if the eye of Sauron looks at that institution from the media or the government, they failed. And so they are about the business of really trying their utmost to be in the good graces of those in power, while supposedly maintaining these orthodox convictions, which won't be, you can't do it. It won't last. It's not possible. But that's the only thing they know. And because they're not actual leaders, they're managerial elites. When the going gets tough, they're probably going to compromise or find other places that they can go and survive somehow. They're not going to be innovative or bold and find, they're not going to see the problem and try to find ways around it. So that would, I think, leave in 2033 the people left in Christianity who are still, and I'm talking about authentic Christianity, the people who are left trying to make a difference, and let's say promote seminary level training, so pastors can actually be supplied to these pulpits, and Christian education and that kind of thing. They're going to be the ones who didn't mind getting canceled. They're going to be actual leaders, not managers. And I think there's going to be innovative, creative, and localized ways probably of approaching some of these things. So will there still be seminaries? I'm sure there will be. I'm sure there will be theological institutions. They'll just be more compromised. Will the Southern Baptist Convention still be around? I'm sure it will be. And I don't want to rain on the parade of guys like Josh Abatoy who are really trying to reform the institution. And I'm kind of glad they're there, just, as a way to let people know what you're doing is wrong. But I don't really think that long term they're not. I actually had a conversation with Josh the other day about this. I said, okay, let's say you take over the denomination, you win the presidency of the SBC. Who do you staff the positions with? Who do you stack the boards with? You just don't have the numbers. It's like Trump during his first administration. Who does he hire who's got the qualifications? There is no one in some of these positions that actually share his political views. So if you're going to take over the SBC, you're going to have to figure out a new factory to produce elites, or go to different watering holes. You have to figure out something there, and that's
exactly
what I don't think they have.
Yeah, I mean, if you took over, like if tomorrow we made Jon Harris the president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, like who would you bring on to be professors for all of the different departments? Like you know what I mean? Like those guys don't exist yet. There'd be some really good guys. We know some very good, some very good guys, but what would you do? How would you do that? I mean, the numbers are not there, like institutionally. And so that's why I'm like, it's not an either or thing. And CJ and I have talked about this, where I'm very much of the position that a lot of church, like the future is going to be independent churches and like loose confederations of aligned churches working, together. That denominations are already not as important as they were 20 years ago. Like people don't look for, oh, I need to find a church in XYZ denomination when I move to this town. That's not a big driving thing like it was 20 or 30 years ago. And I've talked about it. Like one guy I know was a pastor in Boulder, Colorado, and after he left the pastorate, he still maintained a ministry there. And he would talk about how, and here's this like liberal city that's 30 years ahead of wherever America is going to go. And he talked about how, all the pastors there and their various, even like liberal denominations, like United Methodists and things like that. They were all the most conservative people in their particular denomination that were there in Boulder, because like the antithesis forced them to be, right. It's such a liberal place that they had to be. And they all had way more in common with each other than any of them did in their own respective denominations. And I think that like in the local sense will continue to play out. And so you're going to have, fairly independent, alternative institutions. You're going to have like, for me, for example, I went to my seminary training was in Moscow. It was under, the aforementioned Doug Wilson. And there was a program where it's not accredited, but it was still seminary level training. We got Greek and Hebrew and went through the Westminster Confession, and we went through all sorts of systematic theologies, things like that. And so some people are going to be like, see, Doug said this crazy heterodox thing this week, so you must agree with everything he says. But it was a phenomenal education, and one thing that it showed me, as I've surveyed the landscape since, and I've been in the pastorate for a while, is there are guys all over the country that have MDivs from, big shiny MDivs from these schools, and their education is not impressive at all. Like I'll talk about some theological issue that isn't like deep in the weeds or anything, and they'll look at me like I have three heads. Like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of that before. And I'm like, you don't know? You've never heard of this before? What? You went to seminary, man. Like, they didn't cover this.
It's really bad. Yeah, it's
yeah,
really
it's
bad.
It's astounding how poor the education is, and maybe they did cover it, and they still graduate these guys that don't know anything. Obviously, they do. And so I think the opportunity is there. It's kind of like homeschooling almost, where it's like my kids are homeschooled, and like my 9-year-old is testing at like a 9th or 10th grade level in reading and math. And it's like, and it's not like she's some super genius with 180 IQ. It's just she's actually being taught the material and being forced to do the work and actually learning. And so it's the same kind of thing where if you have these independent seminaries, it can go sideways, right? You can get into real crazy stuff and not actually learn. But the potential is also there for you to just totally outshine anything that's institutional right now.
Yeah, that managerial model, it's also a model for certification. What you're doing because you got the certificate that says what you're doing from someone else who got that same certificate before you.
Yeah.
So it is this kind of guild that forms based upon the institutional associations that you have, which equals time, allegiance, and money.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It doesn't really equal knowledge anymore. And that's what it's kind of like printing money that has no backing, which like people warn that that's going to catch up to us. This is the same thing. We're producing these certificates that don't mean anything. They're worthless. They just signal what group you're part of, but they don't actually say that the material. And this is particularly bad in evangelical seminaries where I graduated from one, so I don't think I learned hardly a thing in my seminary experience. I learned much more in grad school. I learned much more even in my homeschooling and undergrad than I did in seminary. And it did bother me. I mean, I did learn a little bit of Hebrew and Greek, but that was because I didn't like those things. And I mean, I probably could have learned it on my own if I actually had the motivation. That was like one area that was weak for me, but which is part of the reason I went. But on the other, like, there were so many fluff courses. Like, we had spiritual disciplines course. It's like, why am I taking this? I sit there for 3 hours, and after I'm done, I'm like, well, I guess I should pray. Praying's a good thing. Like, that's what I learned, or like
how much did that cost you? How much did that class cost you?
I don't know. I don't even want to think about it. There's a leadership course, and it's like, oh, well, today we learned how to make our churches more diverse so that we can have people from all ages and races attending. And it's like this kind of stuff it's fluff. It's not worth anything. People know it doesn't actually have much application in the real world. And this is a crisis. I think if you actually know seminary admins and you catch them in an honest moment, they'll tell you this. I remember when I was at Southeastern, and I'm sure it's worse now. This was like 2017, 2018. I remember a professor telling me that they had so many guys leaving the seminary, taking churches, dividing those churches over stupid stuff, having moral failings. They had to implement all these fluff courses that tell you that you should read your Bible because that's good for you. And it feels like youth group again. Because they're having all these character issues and a lot of it too is, I mean, there really wasn't much in the way of academically challenging material, but it's worse once you only have 160 credits or so for however many it is, and now you're taking some of those academic courses, you're dropping hermeneutics. You don't have to take that. You don't have to take a third theology class. So it's this dumbing down, and we're seeing it at Truth Script right now, which is a blog that I helped start. We have pastors, MDiv pastors, submitting articles, and they're barely legible, some of them. And it's like, I don't know what to say. I'm just like, we have some good writers, but some of them, I don't I feel bad. Like, I don't have the time to coach people, but I'm like, you should have learned to write at seminary. How come you're in the pulpit somewhere? How is this possible? So
No,
anyway, that's my rant. Ran over.
Yeah, man. No, it's astounding. Like I just think about it. I mean, I think about it. I wrote this in my book. The book is coming August 15th. Is we don't have the link yet for pre-orders, but stay tuned for the book. The Boniface option is coming. But I read about this, like, you look at, there's the famous like 1898 entrance exam to Harvard University, and it has questions on it about, classical history and like calculus and trigonometry, like complex math. And this was the entrance exam that 18-year-olds had to take in order to get into Harvard. And you would be hard pressed to find anyone who graduates from Harvard or even gets a grad degree from Harvard that could get 10% on that exam. Right. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. This is the standard that they said, all right, this is what an educated 18-year-old should know. And it's far better than the most educated people today. And it's the same thing I think about seminary. It's like, what would you have learned in like the late 1800s at Princeton University, at Princeton Seminary, right? If you were going to seminary at Princeton, how academic, I mean, it would have been, most people that go to seminary today anywhere that graduate in the tops of their classes, right, that are the valedictorian of their seminary class, would have flunked out of Princeton easily. They would not have, they wouldn't have made it. And I think about that when you have, right, so in that sense, right, when you have difficult, rigorous academics, you have the opportunity to do that once again with more independent institutions where I can be as hard on my own kids, my wife can be, homeschooling them and make them take Latin and make them take difficult things that they're not going to get even at a Christian school, at a good Christian school, and make it harder for them and try to replicate those conditions that existed 100 years ago. And I think you could do that same thing with independent seminaries. That's the kind of stuff we have to do. But these alternate institutions and more micro institutions, things like that, have to be working in concert with guys like Josh Abitoy and others who are trying to retake institutions. It isn't an either or, it's a both and, where if you ask, like, where do we get the guys that are going to be able to staff these things and take them over and do well, we have to make them ourselves, right? We have to produce them, and it's not going to be through the institutions that we make them. It's going to be outside for the most part. And so I want there to be more guys like me that got a very rigorous seminary education through an alternate pathway. And because that's the only way that we're going to move forward into the future, is having parallel, institutions that create leaders. But what do you think, CJ? Are you still there? Are you still alive?
I'm here. Yeah. No, I was just thinking about my own experience because I do the same thing as you, and homeschooling has been sort of a natural reaction. I also want to emphasize that it's sort of a state of emergency reaction.
Yes.
And there's, when I was a libertarian, you have this, every parent should be doing it themselves, and it actually is a state of emergency, though. It's not this ideal that we should have to do this, because there are sociological, culture-wide effects of having these mass-produced children. There is an actual harm, and it is something that needs to be addressed. It is something that needs to be institutionally confronted. And so it's not something where we can just go hide in the caves and educate our children and know that they will have the ideal education and stay in the cave. That's not how civilization functions, and that's not how culture is restored. And so that's something that I've been paying attention to as well. And there's a lot of good co-ops and a lot of good groupings, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, especially with the internet, to have these resources at your disposal. But at the same time too, we can create new institutions, and that takes time. I also wonder whether there's a role out here. Maybe I shouldn't name it, especially with my strategy here, but there's a like a franchise of private homeschool groupings, and I just wonder if, like, people getting involved in that and having this balance between involvement and just kind of biding the time, because the boomers in charge, or like the Gen X people in charge, they have sort of a like a classically liberal demeanor, just this natural tendency to just be less confrontational about the world and the role of education and shaping the culture and all that. And I wonder what role there is in just biding your time and spending 10 years heavily involved in changing that institution slowly from the inside. That has to play a role in this too. This is the way that Western civilization was subverted. It was just molds, over the last 75 years. And so we think a lot about creating new, institutions and competing with the legacy ones. But there also needs to be a role in transforming what is within our reach, too. So I think that's also a strategy that's not talked about a lot. We talk about like the homeschool strategy, which is kind of the head for the hills strategy, which I practice. Mm-hmm. There's the start new institutions, which is sort of the new founding thing, which is good too. But there's also the, what institutions and organizations are there that aren't perfect, but maybe can be made improved over the next 10 to 20 years too. And I think that there's, has to be this sort of like marching through the what already is there, not through the public schools. You're not going to change those. Don't send your kids to deathbeds. But I do think there is a function there in just taking over and sort of radicalizing, so to speak, institutions that have been trying to compete over the last 10 years, but haven't been doing as good a job as maybe needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of low-hanging fruit out there as far as institutions. I mean, some of it is like, you could be in a smaller evangelical church where you're not going to be able to change like the DNA of that church completely. But as the boomers are, go by the wayside, because they're never, it's interesting about that generation is they don't give things up. Like I think Aaron Red wrote online recently that like Al Mohler took over Southern Seminary when he was younger than all of us here. He was like 34. I don't know how old you are, John, but
34.
He was like our age. Yeah, he was our age, right?
Yeah.
When he takes it over. And can you even imagine any institutional power being given to someone our age, to millennials, anywhere? No, never. Like just to be like the lead pastor at one of these big churches, you got to be 40 or 50 years old before they hand the reins over to you. And so that's one of the big things is that, we really haven't talked about, but I think factors in here is you have this glut of young, energetic men that have not had this easy pathway into institutional power that are having to, exercise their skills and abilities and competencies in alternate ways. And that's, I think, part of the reason why things are going this way, why we have, when John talks about these tectonic plates and the shift and everything, is that a lot of the very talented young guys are on that the right wing plate, and are beginning to distinguish themselves and show that they got it. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is the legacy institutions. They're all run by older men that are refusing to give up any power, refusing to raise up any leaders to take over after them. Like in 10, we talk about 10 years from now, all of these guys are going to be old, retired, or no longer with us. And who is going to take over for them? It's going to be like the kind of guys who are our age that are just sycophants, right? That are just lackeys, that are like, these managerialists that are just going to try to keep things on an even keel and everything else. They're not going to have any actual genuine leaders, and they don't have any. Like who are their leaders that are saying anything that is, not even provocative, but have any kind of vision for how things are going to go, and have anything that stands out. They don't have anybody at all. That's to me, that's a pretty big white pill, honestly. Sorry, CJ, we're handing out white pills today. But it's a big white pill that they don't have any leaders. They don't have anybody that can catalyze people and lead them in new directions and energize them and get them going and encourage them. They don't have anybody at all. Like you saw it like 20 years ago when there was the young, restless, reformed era. You had guys like Mark Driscoll, and to a certain extent, what's the guy who's in Dallas, Fort Worth area?
Matt Chandler.
Yeah, he was supposed to be the next big thing. Yeah, you had guys like that, but they've all gone by the wayside for various reasons. And they have nobody. They have nobody at all.
Yeah.
So, you can
There's
argue
a
with me now
vacuum.
about the white pill. You could argue with me now about the white pill, CJ, if you want. But what do you think about that?
You want me to argue against the white pill right now?
Nah.
We have a guest. We have a guest.
Yeah, we don't have enough time for you to argue about the white pill. But I mean, yeah, what? But I guess regarding that other plate, and it's funny because like you'll have these people in the cheap seats kind of sniping and saying, "Oh, all these guys, all the Christian nationalists, they disagree with each other and don't have a unified vision and they're always fighting about things." Do you see that? I don't really see that. I think people are pretty much rowing all in the same direction. Despite various differences. Some guys are more theonomic than others, or whatever. But what do you think about that, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think that attacks have consolidated people who maybe would have seen themselves as different before, but now they realize that they have more in common because they want some just very basic common sense things.
Yeah.
I think that's where the whole the slogan Christian nationalism gooder than trans and kids comes from, right? Like, can we
Yeah.
actually like gather around something as basic as we shouldn't trans kids? And
Yeah.
and that's becoming like, weirdly enough, you couldn't have told me this a decade ago, but that's becoming a source for Christians to unite together. And they'll put down the arguments that they've had over other things, or at least consider them not to be as important. So I do see that there is a united front forming. I think the question is who are going to emerge, and what institutions from the people that emerge are like, is that process going to happen where people actually, we have like identifiable leaders? I think that's starting to happen, but we need more. And institutions from them, or at least some kind of like a way to like draw the proverbial ichthus fish in the sand when we meet someone else and be like, oh, like we do that a little bit now with like, oh, do you listen to this person or do you read this person? But having like some kind of a professional certification, something more substantial, is going to be needed. And to CJ's point, like I think it would be great, like, if you could take back some of these institutions. Here's the problem I see with it, and this is the challenge. A lot of these institutions, I would say the majority of them, probably have at early stages ways to kind of like dump the people that they don't want. So if you have a backbone, if you have a conscience, if you see right and wrong and you take the right stand, there's going to be opportunities at very, very early stages for people to recognize that. And the corrupt middle managers don't want you around. So they will make sure they stick you out in Siberia, or, Ukraine with CJ right now or something. And that you won't be heard from again. And you won't climb that ladder. The only people that get keys to the powerful positions are the ones that play ball.
Yeah.
And that's just how it's set up. So that means it's extremely hard. I mean, like, I had this discussion with Redeem Zoomer is the guy's name, but he wants to take back. I mean, his idea actually sounds to me almost like more doable than taking back the Southern Baptists. He wants to go to dead denominations that have no members, and then be like, well, let's just bring a bunch of friends in or something. Let's make, we only need a few people and we can take over this church, or we can take over this denomination. And they have all these resources. And it's like, I get that. The problem is, how are, like, how do you have a hostile takeover? Like, how do you have a mutiny when all the it would take years to get to those positions? So this is a problem that I don't have worked out, and I'm not sure exactly how it works out. I do think God's in control, though, and I think a lot of this stuff kind of solves itself organically. I'm not saying not to work towards these ends. I'm just saying that, like, with technology and with the greater strain that's coming from the pagan elites, I think that the demand is just going to increase, and something's going to boil over. I think at some point there's going to be, like, it's inevitable, because that's just the way, as CJ said, humans interact. There's going to be networks of people who trust each other, and recommend each other, and they will form training centers, and it might not be a seminary. It may be something that looks different, but yeah, that's already somewhat happening. It just needs to like amp up a lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, yeah, like my own personal experience, like I moved back to my hometown, and the church I grew up in, went to, was a Wesleyan Methodist church, and the pastor there, who had been there for 25 years, was getting very old. He was turning 80, wanted to retire, and he was like a Pentecostal, right? And so it's this tiny little church in the Wesleyan Methodist denomination. And he said, well, hey, do you want to take over? You're not in ministry right now. Do you want to take over this church? And I agreed to do it. I love those people and wanted to take over pastoring there. And I start meeting with the denominational guys, the leaders and stuff, and they're saying, okay, well, the previous pastor, he didn't affirm women's ordination, and he was kind of grandfathered in. But for me, in order to be allowed to take the pastorate, I would have to affirm positively women's ordination. I couldn't just, quietly disagree and we do our own thing in our church. It was, no, you have to subscribe to this in order to be here. And so the church just voted to leave the denomination. And so we, that's what we've done. We're an independent evangelical church now. And that's what we will be, going forward. And so I think in terms of like taking over churches, like I think that'll happen. I think you could do that. I mean, that it worked out okay for us because we were able to, negotiate an agreement to keep our building and things like that. And every situation is, of course, very different. And some of these churches, they have big, beautiful old buildings that are owned by the denomination and not the local congregation. And so you're not, I mean, it's the same thing as like, the PCUSA when Machen left, right? It's all the pastors, the reason the possibility of reform wasn't there is because all of the pastors' pensions were owned by the denomination. And so if they left, they would be destitute into retirement. And so, like you said, it's very difficult to do these things, but I think there is some opportunity there to take over these dying, graying churches. But that's one strategy. There has to just be a multiplicity of them. There have to be a lot of things going on all together. But I remain, really optimistic, especially because, nobody saw 2020 coming, right? Like 2020 was this very clarifying moment where you really saw where the rubber met the road. My own church has had a lot of people come to it since 2020 because they're discontented with how things shook out in their churches. And that'll continue to happen. Like there's going to be like this 2024 is going to be very similar. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, what they're going to do. I mean, we could be at war with China or Russia or both this time next year, or who knows what could happen. Yeah, that's right. Aliens. That's right. And we could have an intergalactic war going on. And so who knows what they'll do. I mean, obviously the toothpaste is out of the lockdown tube, so they'd love to do stuff like that again. And so who knows what's going to happen, but what we do know is the existing structures, the existing institutions will fail the people again. They're going to fail, and they're going to fail even more miserably than they did the first time. And that will be opportunity for people to be in Russell Morrister, more radicalized online. That'll be opportunity for our people to continue to grow and continue to take over and build things up in the future. But yeah, the hour is late. It's very dark. Things are not good. But it's encouraging to see that people are beginning, a small segment of people at least are beginning to see there is an alternative. There's something that we can do. We don't have to just surrender and always lose, right? That's I think the big key takeaway, right, in terms of like being white-pilled a little bit, is there's stuff that you could do. You could be devoting your life to these very difficult battles and start to get little wins and start stacking up these little wins together. And then you see what other people are doing elsewhere and working together with them. Like that's the encouraging thing, is it's not over, that there's still a lot of fight left, and that we can still win. And like you said, God's in charge, God's in control. Yeah. And the church is in the position that it's in. I mean, the church has been in rough places before, right? This is not the first time that the church has been in a very dark spot. And what does God do in those situations? He raises up men to lead his people. That's what he does. And so we're seeing that now, right? That's how I look at it. What do you guys think? We're almost out of time, but what do you guys think about that and as far as the future goes and how it looks?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I was about to say something very similar to what you said. I think it's about trusting God and then realizing that he's going to raise up leaders. If you look at even biblical stories like Moses, he was doing his own thing, far away from Egypt as a shepherd, living a happy life. And the Lord calls him, even though he doesn't think he even has the skills to do what the Lord's telling him to do, to go lead the people of Israel out of Egypt. You have David, who was, the one passed over. He wasn't. We lost CJ. Okay.
We lost CJ. Hopefully he's okay.
I think a Russian mortar just went into his bunker.
Hope you're okay, CJ.
So yeah, I mean, like there's all these stories of God using the weak things to shame the strong, and it really comes down to virtue. Like, are people going to cultivate virtue? That matters a great deal more than the seminary you go to or the connections you have. If you're a virtuous person, that's going to shine. People are going to see it. They're going to build trust, and you're going to have it's worth way more than the paper a degree is written on. You will have authority and the ability to do great things. And I think like that's the more, I think that's the white pill. That's the exciting thing, is there are people that are starting to see this. They want virtue. They're not going to be the kind of people like in Machen's day that sit back and say, well, my 401k's here, my retirement's here.
Yeah.
No, they're going to say, you know what? Money's money. Eternity's a lot longer. I'm going to go do the right thing. Russell Fuller did that, but there was a few people that have done that. It's just rare, but the hope is that becomes less rare, and that, that there can just be some really bold, brash kind of, in your face, like, where's your God? Is he in the bathroom? Like Elijah type of, energy. And I think there is. I think it's out there. I think it's waiting to come back. And that's really Stephen Wolf's point with the Christian Prince, that like there's going to come a time, like the need will be so great. People are going to be desperate for a leader, and that's when you see something like the Christian Prince arise. So, is this stuff all possible? Sure, it is.
Yeah, and the thing, I mean, there's a couple things with what you said there that I think are really good. Like, our friend Nate Fisher, he often talks about, just in terms of the context of what he's doing with new founding and things like that, is that talking about trust as the currency of credibility going forward, and how do you gain that? It's by signaling cost, like signaling that you have stuck your neck out and risked things for what is true and good and right. That's what's valuable, right? That's how you gain trust with people, is saying true things that nobody else wants to say, and everyone's terrified to say out loud. Right? You say true things, and people are going to listen to what you say. Right, whether or not you have the big shiny degree or anything like, or have the sinecure at some seminary or big church or something like that, they're going to listen to, because people listen to me, and I think, well, why do people care what I say? Like, I'm just a pastor of a tiny little church in rural Minnesota, right? Why does anybody listen to anything I have to say? And it's because I will say I'll say what I think. And I won't beat around the bush about it. I'll just come right out and say it. And things that I say have cost me in the past, right? It's cost me opportunities. It's cost me
absolutely
different careers, and so that signals what you have to say is valuable, right? Because you care about what you're saying more than you care about what it's going to get you. And all of these managerial guys, like, they'll just say what they know they have to say. Like, I've always said, like, oh, could I have been, some big megachurch pastor somewhere? Like, I could see the pathway to doing that. And I know exactly the kind of stuff I would have to say and not say, and how to be a good little boy and climb the career ladder as a pastor. But I could never do that. I constitutionally cannot do something like that. I have to say what's true. I have to say what's right. And I think the time has come where those are the kind of guys who are going to rise above with everything else going on. It are the guys that are saying what's true, that have signaled that they have paid costs for what paid the cost for what they have to say. And I'm super encouraged by that. By you and by so many other guys that are willing to say what's true and are like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care about Egypt and all the nice things that Pharaoh has. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to do what's right for my people. And that, I think, is what is, God is going to reward in going forward into the future, is the men who have that mindset that, let God be true and every man a liar. Those are the ones that are going to, build big
Amen.
audiences and lead the church into the future. It's not going to be the Russell Moores. It's not going to be the Mike Cospers talking like NPR voice, like guys like that. It's not going to be those people. They are going to lose, right? Now and in the end.
They do lose down here. Yeah.
Yeah, they do lose down here. We're going to win.
That's right.
We are going to win. And so, yeah, man, like, I think we're out of time. CJ just bounced. He just left. He said, I'm done with this.
Hopefully he's alive. Yeah.
I think he's okay. I think he'll be all right. He's going to make it. We're coming to the end, here. And, obviously, your podcast, Conversations That Matter, I think everyone that listens to us probably listens to you already anyway, but if they don't, they should. They should listen to what you've got to say. And what else? You mentioned you're doing this review of Russell Moore's book, so everyone else, you're taking the bullet for us. Thank you. So we don't.
Yeah, I didn't know. Time and Klein had already done one, and I, if I would have coordinated, maybe I wouldn't have. But I haven't read his yet, and I just decided to listen to it. I was doing some yard work, and I was like, I'll start listening to this book. And
does he read it, or does he at least have a? Does he read it himself?
He reads it himself, so you get so angry while you're doing the yard work, you do it more effectively.
That's
your
right.
Blood pressure's up. But yeah, I'll probably post it at truthscript.com.
Yeah.
I was thinking of American Reformer, but now Time and already got that. So I'll probably post it
Next
at TruthScript, and it'll be shorter, I'm sure. It'll describe what the book's about. But yeah, TruthScript is another place. So yeah, website's johnharrispodcast.com, truthscript.com. You can go to laststandstudios.org. That's I'm making a few documentaries. I'm doing way too many things, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, I'm glad you are. I'm glad you're doing all this stuff. I really appreciate all the stuff you do, all the work you do. And for me, I have more articles coming out for Gab News. I had one last week. Really about kind of the stuff we're talking about here right now, about the church and the future and the things that are happening. Like I'm super excited about things that are occurring right now, because you have all of these guys who are being radicalized on the internet, like young guys who like grow up in non-Christian homes. They never went to church, and like they realize, like Western civilization is good, and Christianity is what built that.
Yeah.
So maybe I should like find someone who like actually believes in Jesus, like the people who built Western civilization. And so like you have like literally millions of young guys who are directionless and are looking for, they'll listen to Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson, people like that. And they don't have any Christians to give them any real guidance that they can follow. And you're starting to see, leaders rise up to lead them. And it's very encouraging. So I wrote about that, and I have, the book, The Boniface Option. I'll have to get you a copy once the advanced readers are going. That's going to be out here. Hopefully, we've set a date for August 15th, and we're hopefully going to be able to fulfill that. So people can begin pre-ordering that soon. And you'll see the link everywhere. Everyone will be annoyed by it, probably all the shilling of my own book that I'm going to be doing. But, I'm very excited about it. It's the Boniface Option, and it will be, it will be a critique of all of modern life and how Christians should confront it, right, on an individual level and on a wider level as well. And so I hope you all really like that as well. But yeah, that's all the time that we have for today. And I want to thank Jon for joining us, and CJ as well. He didn't get to plug anything, but you all know where to find CJ's stuff as well. But yeah, for me, for CJ, for Jon, thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next time.